Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Susan James, Library Manager here at Bayliss Library and Assistant Director of the Superior District Library. And I have just a few things to say. Of course, I'd like to thank Michael Czarnecki for coming to the library and doing 2 events here today. Mark Boucher, Library Director at LSSU, and his staff for collaborating on the events today. Friends of the Library for refreshments. Now I'd like Mark Boucher to introduce our speaker tonight.
All right. Thank you.
Mark, thank you.
All right. So yes, I am Mark from Lake State Library, and it is really my honor to be able to introduce the featured poet for this evening, Michael Czarnecki. I've known Michael now for about 5 years, I think. When I was at my previous library job in Baraboo, Wisconsin, as soon as I started working there, I said, I want to do a lot of outreach events. And so I was talking with some of my former faculty and staff friends that I'd worked with through the years, and I was referred to Michael from a friend who is now teaching in Minnesota. And she said, there's this guy, he's from New York, you've got to have him. And I said, you know what? I've never heard of him. Sorry, Michael, I hadn't. But I said, you know what, Anna, if he's good enough for you, he's good enough for me. So he was doing a travel the States sort of poetry reading tour. And I invited him to come and read at the, let's see, I'm trying to think if you read at the public library or at the campus library. Yeah, right. And we also did a Palm in the Hand memoir series session there as well that ended up turning into a 4.5-year long project, which we also did one here at noon that was very successful. And if you're interested in joining a memoir writing group, be in contact with me up at the library. It's on the webpage. Michael is not only a poet, he is a memoirist, he is a publisher, he lives off the grid, so he lives the way that he actually talks about life. It's really, really inspiring. Sometimes life is so crazy that I just need a little bit of Michael Czarnecki in my life. Lucky for me, I have several of his books. And tonight just happens to be one of those nights that I need a little bit of Michael Czarnecki in my life. So join me in welcoming, all the way from upstate New York, Michael Czarnecki.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, right on. Top that.
Yeah, I don't know if I should even read anymore. This is good enough for the evening, I think. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Then I want to thank Mark and LSSU. I want to thank the library here, the Bayliss Library, and Susan, and also the Friends of the Library for providing refreshments. And thank you all for being here too. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the open mic afterwards also. I always like to start my readings by reading somebody else's poem, just to honor the tradition. So I'm going to read a poem from one of the Chinese poets. I've been influenced a lot by the Chinese and Japanese poets. I've been writing poetry for 47 years. And my first influence is Robert Frost. I used to go hitchhiking. I quit college and hitchhiked through New England and Nova Scotia, like 3 years, 30,000 miles, and I always had Robert Frost with me in my backpack, And then Robinson Jeffers. Anyone here recognize Robinson Jeffers, the poet? Another wonderful, wonderful American poet who was forgotten for quite a while. And then Gary Snyder. And Gary Snyder was an influence. And Snyder led me to the Chinese and Japanese poets. And I've been stuck there ever since for the last 40 years. 38 years or so. So I'm going to read a poem by Li Bai. He's one of or Li Po, you may have seen his name is Li Po, Li Bai. One of the many great Chinese poets. This is called Old Dust. We live our lives as wanderers until, dead, we finally come home. One quick trip between heaven and earth, then the dust of 10,000 generations. The moon rabbit mixes elixirs for nothing. The tree of long life is kindling. Dead, our white bones lie silent when pine trees lean toward spring. Remembering, I sigh. Looking ahead, I sigh once more. This life is missed. What fame, what glory. And that's Levi. He lived from 701 to 762. In fact, I want to recite someone else's poem too. This is Ryokan. He was a Japanese Zen Buddhist monk from the 19th century. And this is one of his poems about poetry. And I love reciting this poem. Who says my poems are poems? My poems are not poems. Once you understand that my poems are not poems, then we can begin discussing poetry. Sometimes we get hung up on what a poem should be. For the very first poem I ever read in public, I started writing in 1967 when I was a junior in high school, and it took me 18 years before I ever shared a poem in public. I couldn't do that. I was very shy and very private. I'd read poems to friends, to girlfriends, and that. Poetry had its uses. But I could never get up in front of an audience. And one time, it was 1985, I went to this peace group program in Bath, New York, and it was a program all about nuclear winter. And I was so moved by that, the idea of just a limited nuclear war would put up so much dust and that in the atmosphere that it would change the climate, we'd maybe all die off, etc. Nuclear winter. I was so moved by that program, I went home and ended up writing a long poem all about that. And it was about a 10-minute long poem, speaking it. But I knew, and that was the first time ever, I knew I needed to speak this poem out loud. And I had never felt that before. So the next week there was another program, and I went up to the two people I knew in the group, and I said, look, I wrote this poem, I'd love to share it with the group. It is long, it's not haiku, it is a long poem. And they said, well, we'll ask some other people. And they said, yeah, we'd like to hear it. So I got up, and I was shaking. I was shaking. In fact, I left a piece of paper out there I need to get. But I was shaking, nervous, but I knew, be loud, be clear, So, it's one that's written on. So, a lot of page numbers. Yep, that's it. Thank you very much. Okay, sorry about that. But I got up there shaking and read this poem, and the guest speaker got up right after me. And he had driven an hour and a half to give the program that night. Now we're starting late. I don't know if this had anything to do with this comment. But he gets up and he looks right at me. He goes, "You call that a poem? Poems are supposed to rime." And he was serious. He was serious. Yeah, and luckily at that point, I knew better. I knew this is his. He didn't hear the internal rhyme, the near rhymes. It wasn't what I was saying. It didn't rhyme. And I think of that whenever I recite that Ryokan poem. Who says my poems are poems? So. Let me recite, okay, the rest will be my poems. And here's one, it's the full moon tonight. Full moon. This isn't a full moon poem, but it does mention the moon. And it's called Midway Poem. Jupiter rises in the east, Venus sets in the west. A half moon hangs halfway in the sky at midwinter as I stand midway between planets at midlife, feeling it's all one big carnival. And I was let in for free. So I hope it stays clear so the moon's out when it's over. It's like I want to run out there now. Is it there? Is it there? I checked just before starting to read. It wasn't visible yet. So the echo of what is past. And in this poem I mentioned one of my very favorite poets, Dao Chen. Dao Chen was, or Dao Yan Ming, I was talking to a woman from China a few weeks ago up on Wheeler Hill where I live. She was up there and she got all excited. She knows all these poets. We had this wonderful conversation. I was giving a reading and I had her get up and read a poem in Chinese, one of Levi's poems. No, Zhu Tengpo's poem. And it's just wonderful. She read and sang it. But this is Dao Chen or Dao Yanming. He wrote poetry 1,600 years ago, and he was considered the first poet of farms and fields in China. And this is a poem where I mention him, The Echo of What Is Past. And in Zen, the term aware in relation to Zen is connected to autumn. The idea, that awareness of how life is, things are changing, time is moving on, not quite a sadness, but maybe that little bit of melancholy, sort of, just that awareness. I tried to capture that with this. The echo of what is past. Dao Chen would understand. I sit drinking wine, chanting poems, dreaming of mountains. Bills pile high at the door, white hairs infiltrate my beard. Daughter approaches womanhood, young son no longer crawls. Late autumn, already snow has covered the ground. Sipping wine, I shiver as a cool breeze caresses me from behind. If you come knocking, daughter sleeping, wife soaking in tub, I sip one more glass of wine, read Zen poems of Ryokan. Outside, the night sky darkens, Venus sets low in the west. If you come knocking at my door, be prepared to sit in silence. A long time ago, I read that poem in a reading. I was on a little tour in New England. I was in Massachusetts, and like here, there was a break after I read, and then an open reading following it. And during the break, people bought books. And this one woman who came up right away bought a couple books, and then there were some other people, and I'm signing. And she went off to the back of the room, and all of a sudden, she yells out from the back of the room, "Oh, that's what you said!" And we all stop and look at her, She said, "You said wife soaking in tub. I thought you said wife sulking in tub." But the real interesting thing, though, when she got up to read 2 poems for the open mic, she read 2 poems about a marriage falling apart. Yes. I've got a couple of new books out. One's a collection of haiku called Morning Mist. Of course, all these books are new to you, because you haven't seen them, but it's a collection of haiku, Morning Mist. I'm going to read just a few from there. I travel across America often, go on journeys, poetic journeys. Route 20, the longest road in America, Boston, Oregon. I've done that twice and wrote a book about that called 20 Days on Route 20. And that's written in haibun, which is a Japanese form, combines haiku and prose. But this book, haiku collections traditionally are separated by seasons, the spring, summer, autumn, winter. And then I did that for the first part of this book. And then the second part, these are journeys, haiku from different journeys. And one of them was up here. I actually came through the UP. It was Route 2. I took Route 2 it starts in Houghton, Maine, at the New Brunswick border. It goes all the way to Lake Champlain. It crosses Lake Champlain and stops right in New York when it gets into New York. And then it continues from the bridge here, the Mackinac Bridge, all the way to Everett, Washington. So it's the north route across America. Wonderful, wonderful journey. So here's a few haiku that were from this region anyway. I didn't get to Sault Sainte Marie, obviously, but this is from the UP. And again, haiku, you're probably all familiar with haiku, but Japanese form of poetry, traditionally 3 lines, 17 syllables, 575. A lot of debate whether you should write it that way in English or not. And I do. I'm not a formalist, but for some reason I love that 575 structure of the haiku, even in English. And it's a poem in the moment. And I always like to say that the ideal haiku is a moment of enlightenment. It's that aha moment that your life has been changed. Very few haiku attain that level, But here's some from the UP. Green emerald lake, small whitecaps from southern wind create constant roar. Of course, this is Lake Michigan. Too long there. Waves splash on body, rippled sand beneath our feet. Great Lake immersion. On edge of lakeshore, rows of gulls face into wind. Waves splash at their feet. Bouncing bet flowers, swaying in September breeze, traffic high above. On side of steep path, old moss-covered wooden bench, sweat drips from forehead. Aspen, hemlock woods, shade sun in middle of day, moss on paved pathway. Strong northwesterlies, churning up Chequamegon Bay, notebook pages flap. Far out on Park Pier, peering off to distant hills, hat held tight in hand. So those are all from the UP. I think the last one actually was in Duluth, maybe. But it's close. And yeah, and actually Chequamegon Bay, that was Wisconsin too. But it's all the Superior Shore, I should say. No, Michigan and then Superior. Yeah. It's all the North Country, and I love the North Country. Where I live in New York, I live about 30 miles north of Corning, and very beautiful rural area. We have 50 acres on a hilltop and Amish neighbors and quiet and peaceful. But it's not the North, it's north, it's not south, obviously, but it's not the North Country. I love going to the Adirondacks and Maine, northern Maine, and up this way. And I've read a lot up in northern Minnesota, and I just love traveling through the North Country. Well, here's two poems, a poem and a story. Actually, Chris and I, she toured me around the area this afternoon for a little while, a wonderful tour, got to see and learned a lot about the area. And as we talked, there were two poems that came up that our conversation reminded me of. So the first one, Chris mentioned about feeding chickadees by hand. Mm-hmm. How many of you have done that? Yeah, and I've been feeding birds for decades, and you can feed them by hand, they get used to you. But this is a poem about an experience feeding chickadees a little different way than by hand. And I went out to feed them by hand, and something changed. Seeing eye to eye with the chickadee. I know it's just for food you come. That's okay. It all gets down to food anyway, one way or another. Yet when I tip back my head, lay a few seeds in my beard, hear you call, dee-dee, dee-dee, then flutter just above my eyes. Feel your feet grasp my beard as you peck down for a seed, then fly off to a nearby tree to eat, and return again and again. I think maybe there's something more than just a few black oil sunflower seeds between us. Who knows? Hey, come spring, I'll let you build a nest with my hair, if you'd like. We didn't quite get around to that. It was so cool because I didn't know, are they gonna land here or not, And two chickadees came, they looked but flew away, and thinking, okay, then I started worrying, what if they get tangled in this, Or what if they grab a hair instead of the seed? Not at all, the gentlest thing, and then every time they would flutter right there. And we were looking in each other's eyes.
Wow.
It's just like, oh.
I have this vision of you being carried off by chickens.
There could be worse ways to go than that. Worse ways to go. And let me go right to the other one that you made me think of. And there's actually a story and a poem here. I've been very much into wild plants, I shouldn't say my whole life, but from the mid-20s on, and tried all sorts of different plants and mushrooms, still eat a lot of wild mushrooms and that. And one plant that I heard grows in our hills that I just wanted to see, I didn't want to gather it, but I wanted to see it, was ginseng. And I had never seen one. And one day I was doing my laundry at the laundromat in Bath. And there was one other gentleman there, and he was a bit older than me. And we got talking, and I mentioned I was a poet, and he goes, well, I don't write. Just like that, real gruff, I don't write, So we didn't talk about poetry. But as we were talking, he said, he's a ginseng hunter. I go, really, you're a ginseng hunter? So I got all excited, and I started asking them questions, what kind of woods do you find it in, and up high in the hills, down low, north, south, east facing, all these questions to help me find it. And then I looked straight at him and asked him this, can I go with you sometime? And this is what he said. I don't take anyone along. If I do, I can't find it. Alone, it's like I'm possessed. I get lost, lose track of time, don't know where I am, and nothing exists except ginseng. That's how I always find it. Wow. Oh. Two things immediately when he said that I knew. One was he was talking about so much more than ginseng. And second, that was a poem, Right. So I always had my journal with me, and I went outside to write down his words. I felt funny sitting there and writing them, So I went outside and wrote down these words. It was a found poem. It wasn't a poem from him. It was a found poem. Well, it came out in my very first chapbook called Ginseng Hunter, and just those words. Well, a couple of months after the book came out, I'm doing my laundry, and guess who's there? The ginseng hunter. So I go, oh, wait here, I got to show you something, right? I got all excited. So I go out to the car, and I get a copy of the book, and I'm walking back to the laundromat, and I hesitated. These were his words, now they're in my book, He's a big guy, and I'm a pacifist. So, well, I'm committed now. So I walked in, and I held the book open to the page, and I handed it to him. I said, do you remember this? And he grabbed the book, got it to that right spacing so he could read it, which I understand very well now. And he's reading the poem to himself, and I'm just watching his face. And a big smile across his face. And I said, yeah, remember when I asked you if I could go with you? That's what you said. Remember you said you didn't, right? That was a poem. That was a poem that you spoke. I said, when you speak from here, it's poetry. And he was like, oh, really. I said, you can have the book, He was, oh, wow, thank you. Could you sign it for me? Sign it right under the poem, right? So I had to ask him his name. I didn't even know his name, and it was Jim. And I go, so I signed it to Jim, from whom I stole this poem. And he laughed, He laughed, and then he said, would you mind if I got another book? My son would think this is so cool. And I said, sure. So I went out, got another book, and signed it to his son. And then I looked straight at him. Can I go with you now? No. And I was so pleased he said no, because you shouldn't, if it's that important to you, you shouldn't be bought off just from a poem. It's like, yeah, you shouldn't be. So there's the ginseng one. I don't know what it was that came up that I thought of that. So I want to read a few poems from another new book called Wild Voices Come When They Will. And what these are spontaneous poems, just written in the moment, never revised, and I do this every day on Facebook. Every day I post a new spontaneous poem. I think I'm up to 368th one last night, I think, And when I started doing that, and I also post a daily photograph every day on Facebook. That's pretty much all I use Facebook for, other than posting events. So check me out on Facebook if you want to check the poems and the photos. But when I started writing these, after a few weeks, I said, maybe eventually there'll be a little book from some of these. Maybe some of them are keepers, because again, I just write them and that's it. Put them out there, I almost forget them then, And then, I thought, maybe I'll pick out some that are keepers, revise them, give them a title and that. And then, I was talking with a friend and she said, leave them just like they are. Don't revise them, don't give them titles, So I thought about that, and I went through the first group of the poems, and that's how I decided to do it. So this is like, and I don't know, there's like 60, 70 poems in here or so, and it's only like, from the first third of the ones I had written. So they're just numbered. They're not titled, they're just numbered. And other than, I don't think, there might have been a spelling mistake or two that I changed, but otherwise I've never changed any of them. So let me read a few of these. Again, they're just numbered. I won't even say the number, it doesn't matter really. As moon approaches full, shadows become stronger, stars grow a little dimmer, my wanderlust more intense. Again, at turning point, where dark overcomes light. From here out, slow descent as nighttime dominates. Time to retreat inside, a little more often. Interior delvings to see what lies hidden, what isn't exposed. Bright light of longer days, maybe discovering some lost gem of delight. So early, this year's leaf change. Already forest floor covered, colored leaves fading away far beneath where they once were. Where they once were. Where were we once? Have our colors faded where we find ourselves now? Leaves on forest floor decay, eventually enrich soil to feed future trees, color a long ago memory. A long ago memory, enriching present time. This present time enriching future time. It goes on and on and on. Early evening, standing in hayfield, my long shadow stretched east over green grass as brilliant sun lowered toward western horizon. A few hours later, in same hayfield, my long shadow stretched west over dark ground as bright moon shone over eastern ridge. Ah, the moon. The Chinese love the moon. They would go out and write poems on a full moon. And in fact, Li Bai, or Li Po, the story about how he died, he was renowned for his drinking too, loved wine, a lot of wine poems. All the Chinese poets are like that. But the story about how he perished, and again, he was certainly one of the greatest of Chinese poets. He was out in a boat at the full moon with his friends and viewing the moon and drinking, and he reached down into the water to pick up the moon, and he fell overboard. And supposedly that's how he ended. I don't do things like that. As my bowl of soup cools, I think how, if you were here, you'd love this homemade concoction. Spicy shrimp noodle, no recipe followed. Garlic, onion, hot pepper, sweet pepper, soy sauce, vegetarian oyster sauce, wild-caught Alaskan shrimp, Asian noodles, straw mushrooms, liberal dashes of chili oil. No one here would have it with me. No one here caring for hot, spicy foods. I cherish each tingly, tasty spoonful. Wish there weren't so many miles between us. You really would have loved it. She would have too. She said, darn, why wasn't I there? This uncle, who now sits in wheelchair, taken care of in assisted living quarters, memory partially here, partially gone. Same uncle I used to trout fish with, wading streams a half century ago. He now 92, I 63. They're still young, he tells me, and I still see us working upstream, casting lures into shimmering water that forever flows on. He died a couple of months after that. It was wonderful to visit him. I was told my sister had seen him 2 days earlier, and he didn't recognize her, barely talked, and I hadn't seen him for a while, a year maybe, and when I walked in and they were wheeling him to me, and halfway down the hall, Michael, and big smile, and he just really perked up, and it was a wonderful visit with him, but it varied day to day, hour to hour probably. 9 months since visiting, words flowed as if continuing conversation started yesterday. Distance irrelevant, apartness irrelevant. What does time matter when minds connect, when hearts connect? This friendship relevant beyond time, beyond space. 2 years ago, I was, 2 years ago now, where would I have been? Let's see, the end of October, I was probably in Austin, Texas. I did a 14-week tour where I gave a reading in each of the 48 lower states, the contiguous states, so 14 weeks on the road. And that whole time, well, backing up just a little bit, years ago, decades ago, so often it's decades ago now, it's not years ago, it's like decades ago, I realized that I have a triangle foundation, the triangle foundation that upholds me. And it's a fluid triangle, the sides change in length, shortness and length. But the three sides of that triangle, one side is creativity, which is for me words. The second side is nature, and the third side is relationships, people. And I aim for equilateral, rarely is it equilateral. Something's always on the short side there, And when I was on that 14-week journey, I really tried two things. One, to be in the moment, just to be present. Don't think about yesterday, don't think about tomorrow, be in the moment. And boy, I succeeded quite well at that. I was surprised. I really kept the past and the future out of my mind most of the time, just was in the moment. But the second thing I tried, for equilateral, and that didn't happen. But when I came back from the trip, I started reflecting on it. I finished, the last reading was home. The first reading was at Acadia National Park. Anyone been to Acadia National Park? That's my spiritual home on the coast of the I've been going there for 44 years. And I started there, and the last reading was by home in Corning, New York, at an art center on my 63rd birthday. So it was like my spiritual home, and then end up at my other home, basically. And when I reflected on the journey, I realized the biggest part of that trip, the biggest side of the triangle, was the relationships, the people. And I connected with old friends. One friend I hadn't seen for 30 years, and it was just amazing. Just within 5 minutes, we were right back where we were 30 years ago, And I've been visiting that friend like 4 times since then now. And the same thing I was telling you, Mark, about Angola, Indiana. Let me just tell you that story quickly. I was on the 48-state tour. I was still booking while I was traveling. I didn't have it all booked ahead of time. And I wanted to read in Angola, Indiana. In Angola, I mentioned it in the Route 20 book. I read there on the Route 20 journey. And the next year when the book came out, I went on the road for 6 months, not 6 months, for 6 weeks with my 6-year-old son, promoting the book. We went west together, and we put a little book of his poems together. He had been creating poems since he was 4. I'd be writing them down. So we put 10 poems in a little chapbook, and he recited a poem for the first time in Angola, Indiana. He stole the show. It was wonderful, But I wanted to read there on this 48-state tour because of that. And I couldn't get a hold of the program person, and tried. And so 2 weeks before I get to Indiana, and a friend of mine, Charlie Rossiter, a wonderful poet, said, hey, if you don't get an official reading in Indiana, go to the dunes and read to Lake Michigan, That's your audience, right? So about 5-6 days before I was going to be in Angola, I think it was a Thursday or Friday, I was going to be there the following Thursday, I got a hold of the program person finally. She goes, I don't know, if it's next week already, and I'm not even going to be here. And I said, look, you don't even have to pay me or anything. I don't even want to, I want to read at the library. I could do a flyer for you in a half hour, email it to you. She hemmed and hawed. She says, okay, I really wanted to, I usually don't push people, right? But I really wanted to read there. So she says, okay, fine. So I sent her the flyer. I showed up in town early that afternoon, walked into the library. I knew she wasn't there. She was away that week. And I walk in, no flyers anywhere. And on the whiteboard as you walk in, poetry, 6:30. That was it, right? So I go up to the desk. I said, excuse me, I'm the poet at 6:30 tonight, I said, there's no flyers. Well, they didn't know anything about flyers or anything. So, okay, so I had set up camp at a campground. I came back in about 6:15, came into a room like this and put my few books out and put my computer on and checking emails. 6:30, nobody's there. 6:35, nobody's there. 6:40, nobody's there. I'm thinking, Lake Michigan, here I come, And then all of a sudden, one woman walked in, and a minute later, another woman walked in. So it was wonderful. We had an hour, wonderful hour, sitting, reading, talking. They said, oh, this room should have been full and all that. And between the two of them, they bought $84 worth of books. Which yes, that's a hint. But anyway, then the one woman, she was a storyteller, and then she said, "Oh, I'm going to my daughter-in-law's for supper. My son's out of town. Why don't you come with me and meet the grandkids?" So went over to the house and had this wonderful supper, and then the kids went off to bed, and her daughter-in-law brought out a bottle of wine, and we sat up talking till midnight, the three of us, and then when I left, she walked me out, and I gave her a hug and a little kiss on the cheek and said goodbye. And well, it turned out a week later, she wrote an article about me in the newspaper. She was also a columnist. She didn't tell me that. And it was all about the day, the reading, that should have been a full house, all that stuff, and about, relating with the kids and the wine. And then she mentioned about leaving, and a classic 2 lines, the ending. "Don't tell," this is how the article ended, "Don't tell me hippies don't exist. I just met one." Which is so funny. And the thing is, though, I've been back there 4 times now, and I'm going back on this trip again, too. She's had a house reading for me. I've done other readings. And the thing is, you never know. I never worry about audience size or anything. 2 people, and look at what this all led to, And so here's a poem. I posted one of my poems, and she replied on Facebook. This was her the same person here I was just telling you about. She put a comment, "The purest of all hippies." She's really hung up on this hippie thing. Right? So here's the poem I took from that line. This was the spontaneous poem that night. "The purest of all hippies, a friend just wrote about me. Never saw myself as a hippie, just followed my own path, influenced by time I lived in, 60s alternative culture, also influenced by others. Thoreau, Tolstoy, Snyder, ancient Chinese poets, listening to my own heart, thumbing east when others went west, opposing war, a pacifist, not into drugs, not a cog in the wheel, holding on to values of peace, love, not materialism, not consumerism, trying to live a life centered on lifeism, letting heart guide me along the way." So that was, Luann was the inspiration, the purest of all hippies. She hasn't said anything about hippies since then. Hopefully she's over that. Hopefully she's over it. A few more from here. This moment, nothing else. So many days without sun. Today, when it appeared, nearly a shock, a revelation, realization that it still exists. Yet later, another insight. Not just sun, but shadows also have been absent in my life. Just a few more, and then I'll end with one other poem. Morning's snowshoe tracks, by late afternoon, gone, where wind rearranges snow. How soon signs of our passing disappear. Where we live, it's 1/3 of a mile off the road, and once the snow comes, we don't drive in and out. It's too windy, it drifts over quickly. So we snowshoe or ski in and out, and rarely see visitors for months, depending, if it's one of those snowy winters. One time my daughter and her husband and 3 kids came New Year's Day. They came early, and it was nice, and they trudged through the snow all the way to the house. They didn't have shoes or skis, and while they were there, the wind kicked up, it got really cold, it started snowing. When they left, it was an ordeal for them getting out. And she called me when they got home. "Dad, we're not coming again till spring." And they didn't. And they didn't. How many are into the old folk music? Yeah, the old folk music. Here's a poem mentioning that. As temperature plummets outside, I'm inside near wood stove, listening to mid-60s folk music. Oaks, Paxton, Rush, Judy, Joni, Donovan, Buffy. I'm back on Goodyear Street, a half-century ago. Upstairs attic bedroom, portable record player, LPs, 45 singles. Radio, WKBW, Jefferson K's Inside Out, weekly folk music show. These songs, my poetry, before Frost, Jeffers, Snyder. Universal soldier, both sides now. I can't help but wonder, no regrets. Circle game, I ain't marching anymore. Catch the wind. I listen now on laptop. New technology, same words, same meanings, still resonating inside like they did in attic room in house that no longer exists. And I saw Tom Rush 2 weeks ago. Had a wonderful conversation with him. It was just, really super, super performance. Okay, just two or three more here, and then one final poem. Persistence, patience, long time learning, long time practicing, learning, patience, persistence. Some things just take time. One quick story, then I'll finish with one poem. That made me think of a story. For a year, I did a weekly program at VA Hospital in Bath, New York, near where I live. And amazing experience. So many wonderful stories from that. And here's just one of them. Every week I'd go there, and there'd be 25 plus guys there every week. And we handed out journals, and sometimes we write, sometimes we just talk. Not everybody wrote, it didn't make anybody write, but there'd be some writing going on. And one day, we had talked for a while, and the guys were writing, and Ron always sat off to the side in a chair on the side, never said a word. He could talk, but he never spoke. He never wrote. And he's sitting there, and these guys are writing, and all of a sudden Ron comes walking up to me, and he held open his journal to the first page, and he had written something. I said, Ron, this is a poem. He just had this big smile on his face, I said, yeah, this is a poem. Can I read it to the guys? And he nodded. I said, guys, sorry to disturb you. Sorry, but give me your attention. I want to share a poem that Ron just wrote. And they were all excited. Oh, Ron wrote a poem, right? Wrote a poem. And so I get all their attention. I go, okay, I'm going to read the poem. Persistence. Would you like to hear that again? And they chuckled just like you did, And I said, no, seriously, listen to this. Listen, this is a poem. Listen. Persistence. I said, there's very few one-word poems. This is a poem. And what an amazing conversation came from that. A couple of months later, I moved to Maine, so we ended the project. Before ending it, we put together a little book of some of the writings of the guys, and we called it Persistence. Mm-hmm. It's like, what a wonderful, wonderful experience that was that year. Okay, let me finish with one last poem, prose poem. Any questions? Any curiosities? Any questions? I'm open to them. I used to do a lot of schoolwork, poet in residence, and hey kids, come on, best way to learn is ask questions. So come on, anyone curious about anything? Yes, thank you.
You're in touch with nature, with creativity.
Yeah.
Can you communicate with animal spirits?
Can I communicate with animal spirits? It's interesting how you put it, can I communicate? I've had a number of experiences with voices in nature. I can't say that I communicated in that direction, but there's been a number of amazing experiences that came from there to me, voices even, and experiences with animals. Yeah, so does that fit with, or are you also talking about from here to there?
It works with your Zen combination with nature, and that my perspective is almost in parallel with you. I'm a Reiki master teacher.
Okay.
So I can communicate with trees, I can communicate with crystals, I can communicate with eagles. I am drawn by different spirits.
Energy, spirits.
And most of my writing is channeled through my spirit guides.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, I learned after a while to listen to those voices. You know, the first time it was like, no, I'm going back home. You know, it was come into the dark, come into the night. I wasn't ready, you know. But since then, I started listening to those voices and have led me to some amazing little experiences, you know, and that. So, yeah. Any other questions at all? Okay, and let me finish with one last piece, a prose poem. And as autumn approaches on Wheeler Hill, and Wheeler Hill is where I live, and this is, I mentioned some of the Chinese poets I spoke about, and Capella, a star in the constellation Auriga. Anyone familiar with Henry Beston, the writer Henry Beston? He wrote a classic book called The Outermost House, a natural history book. He lived on outer Cape Cod in a cabin back in the 20s for a year. Amazing, wonderful book. And then he also lived in Maine and wrote books from there. But he talked about when he sees that star rising over the barn, he knows autumn is soon to follow. So I was referring to that with this. And I think that's all you need to know. So this will be my final piece. As autumn approaches on Wheeler Hill, oak bench, open fire, lamplight, wine glass, poems of Yang Wan Li. Beyond flames, cool air, cold stars. Nearest neighbor, out of view. Who is there to share this moment with me? Yang Wan Li would pour wine, chant poems. So too, Han Shan, Dao Chen, Zhu Tung Po. A far light of a car, miles away down in the valley, catches my eye. Distant, distant the dust of the world. Distant, distant the poets whose hearts are like mine. Capella rises in the northeast, autumn soon to follow. A great horned owl calls out beyond western woods. What a poem that is. Heaven my blanket, earth my pillow. The words of Yang Wan Li reverberate as I gaze up at late summer constellations, think of the coming season. Dal retired at age 40, grew rice and vegetables, wrote poems, drank wine. Han Shan lived in a cave at Cold Mountain, writing poems on walls. Zhu Tung Po, in exile, the poet of the Eastern Slope. From where we will soon build our house, I gaze at endless rows of hills. Staying put, traveling far, what difference does it make? Basho walked the back roads of Japan, writing prose and haiku. I think of the granite coast of Maine. Who is it will walk there with me, writing poems, sipping wine as we go? A gust of wind kicks up from the west. A few leaves tumble near fire. I blow out lamp, close book, walk off to bed. Thank you very much. Can we take a little break before the open mic, or do you go right into it? Okay, yeah, so we have refreshments there that should be eaten. I was told when I walked in, you've got to eat, you've got to eat. So,
We have breakfast at the library.
Juicy juice there, no added sugar.
and I've got a list there, if you want to give me your email, I'll put you on my list. I'll send out journal entries once in a while, and hopefully I'll be back someday.
You sure?
No, it's
It's got the pen out, it's like, oh, here we go.
Welcome back to the open mic portion of tonight's event. And first up is Phil Danstill.
All right, Phil. You go get him.
I haven't heard anything yet. It's a tough act to follow, that's for sure.
Why do you think I put my name on there, third or fourth?
I was thinking about putting mine fifth, number one. I have two poems, and one is by a pretty good poet from New England, Emily Dickinson, in celebration of autumn. And the second one is written by me, and let me read Emily's first. She's one of my favorite poets.
That's even a harder act to follow.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, she and Walt are, they're up there.
Yeah.
there's no title, but this is number 656. You know, she didn't put numbers on these things, but and if you like Emily Dickinson, this is what you want to get, the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. It is fantastic. So this is one of her autumn poems. And the main metaphor is basically arterial bleeding. And her mind is amazing. The name of it is Autumn. The hue of it is blood. An artery upon the hill, a vein along the road, great globules in the alleys, and oh, the shower of stain when winds upset the basin and spill the scarlet rain. It sprinkles bonnets far below. It gathers ruddy pools, then eddies like a rose away upon vermilion wheels. That's Emily. The second poem is, I wrote the first version of this poem 7 years ago. And I had to change it because yesterday was my birthday. I turned 68 yesterday. And this poem is about turning 68, but it's also about someone else who turned 68 yesterday, who was a famous person, American person. And when I first wrote this poem, for me and for her, I sent it to her. And of course, you know, I never got an answer because she's a famous person. But just a couple of things about it, and then I'll read it. It's called On Turning 68 for Hillary and Me. So you guessed that famous person is Hillary Clinton. We share the same birthday, we're the same age. I don't know when exactly she was born, but you know, it's close enough. And when I first wrote it, of course, the title was On Turning 60 for Hillary and Me. There's some Scorpio stuff in here, there's some boomer stuff in here. Politics, of course. And I think that's all I need to say. There is an epigraph from Don DeLillo. I don't know if you know Don DeLillo, a great novelist. We'll get to that. So, on turning 68 for Hillary and me. Epigraph. Some people are lucky. They become who they are supposed to be. And that's Don DeLillo from Fallen Man. We're beyond young old now, still reinventing ourselves at 68, still convinced that it's all about us. We don't see the banalities of being boomers. I spent my time, spurred by Irish Catholic guilt, searching for words for the wordless, simplifying my life, while you grind your axes with a Protestant work ethic, anchored in courtrooms, boardrooms, cloakrooms, conducting high-level security meetings, complicating your life with the politics of power. You know we're savvy Scorpios, and you know what that means. Our key phrase is, I desire. Our water form is calm. We are like murky waters that hold unknown things. We also know too well that we're passionate, secretive, powerful. But we're also cunning, suspicious, controlling. And we govern the pelvis and reproductive organs. Cool, don't you think? I also think it's somewhat ironic that on October 26th, the following happened. In 1825, the Erie Canal opened. In 1881, they shot it out at the OK Corral. Nice dodging of bullets in the Benghazi hearings, but watch your back in the debates. In 1955, Rebel Without a Cause opened. Oh, those 50s and 60s. An infant received a baboon heart in 1985. She's now eligible to vote. George W. Bush signed the Patriot Act in 2001, enough said. And Mark Twain delivered a speech in Hartford, Connecticut, in which he said, "I don't mind what the opposition says of me so long as they don't tell the truth." I think I know what you want from me on our birthday, but I don't know if it's what you need from me. My vote is a small but necessary thing, so okay, you have my vote if you get us out of Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. You have my vote if you solve the immigration crisis, address income inequality, achieve reasonable gun control, and yes, help save the planet. No, I'm not finished.
You got
Still
going.
These are what I want from you, but they beg the question, what do I need from you? I need you to prove that we haven't squandered our birthright, betrayed our boomerhood, wasted our naturally selected evolution to power. We lie comfortably wedged like inconvenient truths between the greatest generation and Gens X, Y, Z. So here's the scenario. Chelsea becomes first daughter again. Socks, if he's still around, becomes first dog again. And Bill becomes first gentleman. You'll stroll in the rose garden again, an aging Eve and her grinning Adam, wielding again, we hope, the power of promise fulfilled. Do I put your campaign sign in my front yard? I think not. Do I make a tax-deductible political contribution? I say no. My vote should be enough. I'll be here in the rusting upper Midwest, happily admiring you from afar, my Scorpio soul sister, as I ponder Milton's adage that they also serve who only stand and wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Next up is Judy Merrill Smith.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Well, since I just had the pleasure of doing a reading here a couple weeks ago, at first I thought I wouldn't read anything of mine because you guys are going to be sick of me. But Michael kind of changed my mind. But I'm going to start with somebody else. I'm going to start with Mark Nepo. He's probably best known for the Book of Awakening, and I like his nonfiction, but it's like you have to read 2 pages and mull over it for like 24 hours. It's very dense. I love his poetry because to me it's much more accessible. And this one is called Sent on My Way for My Great-Grandmother. A small blurry figure appears at the doorway of the home. It is Bella, my Russian Jewess, on a ramp in a wheelchair, waving her stick at me. A firstborn of a firstborn of a firstborn. She is beckoning, here, for you, a lollipop. I am 3. She, 105. Darkly dressed relatives lined the ramp like pines waiting for wind. She gloats on her spoked throne. I'm her immigrant heir. The pines rustle. Her bony hands are cold. She grips me above the elbows. She mouths something in a language I don't understand. The pines approve. Her stick slips to the ramp. She runs her fingers behind my ears. Her stiff thumbs rub my temples. She pulls me to her and the cold foot plates crease my ankles. She whispers something in my ear. Her breath is short and stale. She picks up her stick and presses it to my palm like a scepter. I give it back. The tall pines sigh. She looks skyward and rocks. I feel her breath even now, 50 years on. This is my first memory, And I wonder what she carried from the beginning and where the things that matter that we don't understand live. Sometimes when whispering in snow to no one, I wonder if the long search for poetry has all been to find what she said to me. So I pulled out a couple of mine. This first one is called Firework. Leaking into the night sky like a hissing balloon, a weather vane gone crazy, or a rooster who's lost all sense of crowing time, I shoot out, half-cocked, not sure of aim or target or direction, careening through the space of this day, giddy with the freedom of not knowing, scared, terrified of failure, yet hoping that there is no such thing as missing your life if you've pulled back the string of your heart and let it all fly true. And this last one is probably still a little rough. It's called Beach Winds August, and I wrote it this August, so it's still a little rough. It's a Lake Superior poem, too. My brain is a fog of recriminations and ruminations, grumbling with the fierce humidity of disgust and turmoil. Why curse a man who has no thought of me? He is blinded by the smallness which bites at me, at all of us. The cold depths wash over my ankles, pulling at the rocks. I notice that every stone is a complete masterpiece. I pick up so many and turn them over in my hands. I want to hug them all to my chest. Sand and pebbles roll over my toes. I wish my soul could be rolled smooth by waves. One rock looks meteoric, brown crusted and green crystalline mystery. It's likely more humble, but I roll around its strangeness and wonder, is it fallen? We are all fallen, all loved. I namaste the horizon and a white feather lands at my feet. I smile and toss it into the surf, watching it pulled along and under and out of sight. My heart becomes light. I barefoot home. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Next is Frank Blissett.
I have to apologize if my voice is a little rough today. I had a little bit of a cold over the weekend. I just got a few poems of my own here to give. The first one actually came from a workshop that we did a few years ago with M.L. Liebler. He's been here a few times, and it's always fun seeing him. And I hope that we can see him again before too long.
Indeed.
And like I said, this is from one of his poetry workshops. This is Beatnik Break. Just 2 weeks past the last frost, when spring's first green was gold, and we are finally in the final green of dirt road gravel and deer flies' eyes shining green. 2 days of rain and the poplar branches are heavy against the roof, swishing the rhythm, alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, or Coleridge rhythms, rust-flecked and creaking to life. Or Sandberg, I am the grass, let me work, as the grass works and grows knee-high green. Neither yesterday, anger, nor fear, tomorrow, have a place today. And the best way to finish a poem is to stop. And let's see here.
You sounded just like Sandberg in those lines.
I've heard him reading that.
Yeah, you sounded just,
yes.
so have I, and sounded just like him.
That's actually one of my favorites. He and Frost are both big influences on me, but that's one of my favorites there. And the next one came about because I got my first tractor last year, actually about this time. This is tractor smell. There is such a thing as a tractor smell. It is a blend of grease and diesel that says, a living thing lies here, in the barn, with the chipping sparrows and their rusty heads. A thing that breathes fog and frost in turn through the year, and purrs a great rumble at the prospect of work. It is a thing that lives inch by inch through the front 40's muddy clay, and inch by inch through the snowbanks draped across the drive by a big blow over the lake. And when it finally fades, when its glow plugs no longer burn, after it has breathed its last, if not hauled off, it just might be allowed to sink into the soil. And my last one, I tried to make this 3 haikus, so we'll see if this works out. Let's see. At childhood's first noon, blue unto blue horizon of Superior, days draw down faster, and the world has shrunk too, this decade than last. Distilled to haiku in the lilies beside me and goat spirit before.
Goat spirit, one of my favorite plants.
I got plenty of it.
Me too, yeah.
Thanks, Frank. Renee Bradley is next.
Did you write those today, Frank? Awesome.
I just wanted to say thank you, Michael, because for the workshop earlier and the reading today, because I feel fully awake and alive today. Thank you. I have a couple of poems that came from. I lived in Fairbanks, Alaska, when the Exxon Valdez ran aground and spilled all that damn oil. These are out of that. This is called "Life is Sacred." Of course life is sacred. I risk icy ditches for haphazard squirrels. The bumper sticker on my lawnmower reads, "I break for toads." I bear an undying grudge for Joseph Hazelwood, guiltily sleepless, I hope, under the glare of one-winged eagles, the sad eyes of oil-soaked sea otters upon him, along with the knowledge that Prince William Sound will never recover. Life is sacred, sacred and fragile. And the other one, I read a story in Alaska Magazine soon after that happened about an eagle that was injured in the spill, and they took it in and they saved its life, but it was never able to fly again. But it was actually used as a blood donor for other eagles that were brought in. I just thought that was so incredible. This is One Wing. My flight was taken from me, stolen by a thief in the night. He is known by the name Hazelwood. Does he think he knows grief? My grief knows no bounds. I am known by the name One Wing. And I keep going back to this one in election years. Pure cussedness kept him on the path of the straight and narrow. Though a whole zoo full of baby animals blocked his way, he wouldn't swerve, let blood be spilt. For his path of the straight and narrow wasn't good, only straight, only narrow. And I'm breaking the 3-poem rule tonight, I'm sorry.
They're short.
Some poets write their egos onto the page to show how smart they are. They dare you to understand, and if you think that you do, they pull the rug from under you and prove you wrong. They're like emperors parading their finery, expecting exclamations, adulations, admiration, and applause. No one is to say otherwise. I want poems to come to me wearing jeans and flannel and offer me a mug of hot tea, inviting me to make myself at home. And I just have one more, inspired by your friend Ron with persistence. It's called The Hokey Pokey. Love one another. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. And finally, we have Alex Chorney.
This first one I debated whether or not to read. It's very, very emotional. About 2 months ago in the province of Alberta, which is a western province in Canada, there was a home invasion kind of thing, and the 28-year-old father who had been in trouble with the law had gotten custody of his little daughter and changed his whole life because she was the light of his life. He was murdered and she was taken, and her life was taken as well. So this is her trying to speak to her father. It's called tenderness. We are somewhere in between. I feel all numb, a chill without a cold. Your hand is my salvation. Both taken before our time, truly in some limbo. This briefness requires reconciliation before we can embrace the lights. We were ripped from our foundations. Why is what I'm asking. How could this happen? I was so happy where I was. We didn't have much, but we still had each other. Your wings did me cover with their encompassing tenderness. We are forever bonded. Such a removal is unfounded. No logical reason, no sufficient explanation. I wish this on no one. It's an indignation. My tiny soul has compassion, but no forgiveness for such an act. Has all the markings of one absorbed by darkness. There are no mitigating principles here. If I'm able to find peace, it will be due to your presence. How with you did I play? You were a granddaddy. My tears cross all terrains. May these douse all fires, so no one else has to experience such a thing. I am your little one. This way do I wish to stay. Please hold me in your arms. Only there do I feel safe and all right. Okay. This one I just wrote yesterday, and it's full of magic and fairies and just like going back thousands of years and walking in the forest and being one with nature, one with yourself, not being disconnected like we are nowadays because we're so full of run here, run there, and just forget about our inner root and core, which when you ask for answers, you don't look without, you look within. And this is what it's all about. Inner contemplation. You sought peace and quiet. Found this in the forest, in a cove by a spring, whose droplets played like the strings on a harp from which came tranquility. As you were in your glory, in the midst of these whispering silhouettes, whose touch was like silk, as gentle as a fawn, why you fell asleep at the foot of a tree, in such a calm atmosphere, in the presence of these wood nymphs, who made you a bed of soft, cozy cushions, whose petals tickle your fancy, placing you in a dreamy state. As you float silently by, as if in an air balloon, being steered by fuzzy thoughts, leading you to a velvet valley. You land with a parachute, coming to rest by a stream, whose waters glisten in mellowing ripples. where you dangle your feet, so nudged by silvery minnows in sleek, slender suits darting about in meandering cycles. You hear what you don't believe you can, for in this plastic condition, communication with all life forms is not only possible in such a sereness, but is enabled by a shift towards an inner contemplation. And this one I wrote a couple weeks ago, and every year when I send out about 60 Christmas cards, I include my Christmas poem. And this, because I have a beautiful 7-year-old daughter, this is what I wrote. Child's delight. There is, if you believe, as a magic can exist, if we envision with an innocence, if we make the time to feel what we touch. No matter how the years go by, we create the ambiance just by sharing what dwells deep within. But this takes intention to grasp with a tenderness, to hold as if it's the last of its kind, to keep a faith that there's more to this than what we are told, to see our world in all of its striations. Now we are getting warm, not near, but on the right path, one that is without blinders, to decipher a dream in relation to our life, that all is possible if we only dare to peel back the layers, ones that hold us in between, which keep us from what lies beyond, as who's to say what is or isn't. Once we get to the other side, removing fears, walking over a bridge, there comes an enlightenment, one that reveals the shades of a truth. So if a thought brings a tear, if an emotion sparks a happiness, this on its own is worth its weight in observing a child's delight, in a smile whose footsteps remain forever in the soul after the moment has passed. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the readers, and Michael Czarnecki and Mark Boucher for enabling to come here and spend a day with us. So thanks again to everyone for coming, and hope to see you in January, if not before.